Hey guys, I am creating right now the video that I talked about posting for the week about Unit 1 and Unit 2 issues from the diagnostic. There'll be a link here and there'll be a link on Google Classroom. So to begin, Unit 1 is called the Global Tapestry. Dumb name, but it's what we spent from about December through February on. The years 1200 to 1450, as you can see up here. These images are taken from Freemanpedia, which I also linked on that resource sheet. What the Global Tapestry unit tried to do is it tried to give you kind of a little picturesque view of what was happening in East Asia, the Islamic world, South and Southeast Asia, the Americas, which in class we completely ignored, Africa, and then in Europe. So you'll notice that I highlighted in red East Asia, which is in the blue over here, South and Southeast Asia, which is this kind of brownish color, and the Americas, which is green. From the diagnostic you guys took in Albert, these three regions were your primary problems. It doesn't mean the Islamic world, Africa, and Europe are insignificant. It just means you guys didn't have as many problems on that. So we're going to focus on these three in a little review today. And then the mouse guy. Put a little country music in the background because I don't like silence. So if you don't like country, tough. So before we begin looking at those three regions, I want to kind of separate the types of states we're going to look at into two categories. Those that continue state forms from the classical era. So those would be empires that reconstitute or reform from those that fell. So in East Asia, the Han Dynasty had fallen, and then that mandate of heaven's cyclical cycle moves into new dynasties. So prior to 1200, we had the Sui and the Tang that reconstitute the Chinese imperial system. But at the beginning of the Global Tapestry time period, from when you'll be tested from 1200 to now, 1900, 1200 to 1900, the Song of the dynasty. And then in Europe, you had a reconstituted or never-ending Roman Empire in the East that was called the Byzantines. You also had the earlier state form of the city-state, which is a central city like Athens and then the surrounding area near it. You had those still constituted in Venice, and then we'll see in East Africa, Swahili city-states. Okay. But innovations or new types of state forms that are in the Global Tapestry unit are those that institute for foreign policy what's called a tribute system. So beginning with the Tang and then the Song in China, they made the countries around them pay tribute to them, which was a form of receiving recognition. You recognize the Chinese greatness, and then they recognize your reason to exist. And you either pay them in tribute to get access to their goods. So in the Chinese concept, the emperor, the imperial bureaucracy, and then the Chinese people behind walls, think of the Great Wall, they're the center of the world. And then those that are outside, closest to them, the barbarians, they pay tribute to the emperor. They acknowledge his authority. And then further outside are states you don't come in contact with the barbarians that don't pay you tribute. But the emperor's goal is to get everybody outside to pay tribute to them. Okay? Sometimes this is done through military might. You journey beyond the wall and you conquer some. Instead of destroying them, you say, if you surrender and pay us tribute, then we'll leave you be, and then we'll have access to Chinese trade. Okay? Sometimes it's through alliances. Different Chinese princesses, not princes, princesses would be married off to barbarian leaders and form alliances. The Aztecs in what's today Mexico do something similar. They conquer the neighboring civilizations near them of Native American tribes. And then instead of trying to govern them directly, absorbing them into the empire, they established their own tribute system where the conquered nations would pay tribute to the Aztec in the forms of goods, labor, and then they would exist. Okay? So the tribute system is a global tapestry or post-classical foreign policy system that the Chinese and the Aztec do. Feudalism is a new type of regional. This shows here kind of a couple of images of what Europe and Japan are doing politically and economically in this era. Feudal is a synonym for regional. So whereas empires are centralized, emperor at the center with his government, all decisions flow outward from the emperor. In a regional structure or a feudal structure, you might have a king, but the king doesn't exercise good central authority. He's kind of powerless the further you get from the center. And he has to rule through nobles who utilize local knights to control the peasantry. So feudalism is a chain of obligations. On the left, the peasants supply food and services to the knights. The knights provide military service to the nobility, and the nobility sends tax revenue and then some of their knights to help serve if the king has to defend against a foreign power. In exchanges, the king, as ruler of the land, gives his land in title to nobility to rule in his name. The nobility would take that land and divide it up into what are called fiefs, or small plots of land that a knight would control. And then on that land are the peasants who do all the work to send upwards. Okay? So it's a little protection scheme, kind of like the mafia, where the mafia person at the top is in charge, but he's only as powerful as those people he works through. Peasantry, living on these fiefs of individual knights, live in an economic system called manorialism, or the manor. Think of manor as a synonym for plantation. Is a local village, the fields they would plant, and then this becomes this very self-sufficient, very regionalized system based on agriculture, where you don't really need a lot of foreign trade because everything can happen right here. So this economic system of manorialism supports the political system of feudalism. Peasants do all the work, moving up to the king, all based on land, is the manor, or the fief, is the basic economic unit at the bottom. So feudalism happens in societies that don't have strong centralized empires. So after the Roman Empire, there is no European one state or European one empire. Same thing's going to happen in Japan in this era. They'll have an emperor, but the emperor becomes much more of a figurehead, a religious figurehead of sorts. And the nation itself is ruled through alliances of military leaders. The ultimate leader would be called the shogun. We'll talk about in a second. Okay? So you guys had problems, since these are in red, with questions related to these on the diagnostic. Their innovation are just state forms based on the nomadic peoples that move out of Central Asia or Arabia. So when Arabs are moving out of Arabia, they form caliphates. The Turks, which is what this image is, as they move out of Central Asia, they form sultanates. The sultan is the king, so kingdom, sultanate. And the Mongols form khanates. And these are just tribal-based systems where the most powerful, recognized, usually elder authority rules over the tribe. And then upon the death of the caliph, the sultan, or the khan, originally nomadic culture takes over, and an appointed next khan would be that who is recognized by the community or the tribe as most successful. Eventually, those nomadic ideas of inheritance of rights based upon communal support will morph into hereditary, like traditional kingdoms. Okay? So East Asia, you guys have problems with. So in East Asia and the global tapestry, it's China, Korea, and then Japan. In China, there are 3 dynasties. So this map is showing you not these existing all at once, but how the Song dynasty is just basically the southern part. After the Song comes the Yuan, which you can see from the image, are the Mongol conquerors of China who adopt a Chinese title for their dynasty. And then the Ming is the 3rd dynasty encompassing what the Song was, and then the Ming. And the Ming kicked the Mongols out. They build Beijing's Forbidden City. They rebuild this Grand Canal that connects Beijing to Hangzhou in the south. And then they'll instigate the only kind of voyages of exploration and discovery into the Hunnic and Zhenghe, which puts Chinese tribute system into practice across the Indian Ocean. Okay? In Japan, they have that feudal system called the shogunate, where a central military power is established when one lord defeats the others in battle and declares himself shogun. Okay? And in Korea, they're establishing a centralized empire, copying Chinese models. They're the most Chinese culturally of East Asian societies, whereas Japan is a little more unique. Okay? At the end of most of the Freemanpedia pages, they'll give you this too long. I didn't read the chapter. I didn't read all the pages stuff, so they try to summarize what it's about. So this is a summary of the East Asia section. When it says picks up East Asia in transition, it's because 1200 is not really a good breaking point. It's not the end of one dynasty and the beginning of another. It's the middle of the Song. So we're looking at how China is the Song in the south. And then you don't have to really know these other little dynasties, but there were two little breakaways in the north of China that would be conquered pretty quickly by the Mongols. And you've got a Chinese empire that's weak, the Song. You've got a united Japan under a military government. And then you've got a continuing dynasty in Korea. It looks like Korea. That's where it gets its name. Big topic in the global tapestry time period in East Asia is the Mongols who invade and disrupt all this. They conquer Korea, they conquer China, they attempt to conquer Japan, but can't. The word kamikaze, which you think about as in World War II, the planes that would crash into the American ships. It means divine wind, and it's the name given to the hurricanes or the typhoons that destroy the Mongol fleets that try to invade Japan. And the Japanese believe that that was the gods sending protection so the Mongols wouldn't conquer them. Okay? They'll ask you about the Silk Road, probably. If they ask you about this dude's voyages, it's this brief period, about 35 years, timeline down here, of when China navally starts sending out voyages to enact tribute from the Indian Ocean world. You notice the time frame of it, 1405 to 1433. The great historical what if is, what if the Chinese had kept doing this after 1433? Because in 1498, the Portuguese round the Cape of Good Hope and land in India. They land in a vacuum because the Chinese, 60 years earlier, had decided not to do these great treasure fleets seeking tribute around the Indian Ocean. And when they seek to not do that, the Europeans can move into this kind of naval vacuum. If the Chinese had kept this up, they might have turned European adventurers back because they would have been confronted with these gigantic fleets that they would not have been able to reckon with. The reason that the Chinese turned back in the 1430s is the Ming Dynasty decides that their greater concern are not these weaker societies that they see in the oceans, but worrying about another Central Asian nomadic group. The Mongols are still around, for instance, in maybe Southwest Asia and then in Russia. So they turn their energies to fighting and expanding by land, building more walls, expanding Chinese territory by land and not by sea. Okay? So they kind of turn, as it says here, more into themselves than into by sea. If you remember from first semester when we looked at Neo-Confucianism, that was the three main beliefs of China, Confucianism, Buddhism, and Taoism, combining and then influencing the societies around it. So this image shows you what's called the three vinegars. Each of these characters represents one of these three. You've got the Buddha in the middle. You've got Confucius on the left, And then you've got the mythical founder of Taoism, Lao Tzu, on the right. And if you read each of these captions, it's kind of encapsulating the main principles of these beliefs. It's also indicating how they can work together and fuse in Neo or New Confucianism, which will dominate China and then Korea and to some extent Japan, though Japan has its own native religion called Shinto, which when you see these little things, these are called torii. These are spiritual gates in Japan. Sometimes you see them wrongly outside like Asian restaurants today. They're really just about Japanese native belief of Shinto, which is kind of a very animistic idea of spirits, natural spirits everywhere. So there's a little East Asia review. South and Southeast Asia involves not just South Asia or India today, but also land South Asia, Southeast Asia, which would be Thailand, Cambodia, Vietnam, and also island Southeast Asia, which today is Indonesia and Malaysia. Okay. In South Asia at this time, the north, so where the star is, that's a Muslim state called the Sultanate of Delhi. So whenever you see Sultanate, you need to think that those are the political units of Turkish peoples. So Turks had invaded through Afghanistan, and in the north established a Muslim government. But then there are Hindu kingdoms still, the Rajputs, which Raj means king. So these are kingdoms, Hindu kingdoms. And then a larger empire in the south, the Jayanagara. So Rajput kingdoms exist in the north, fighting the Sultanate of Delhi, and then a united Hindu empire in the south. In Southeast Asia, by sea, you've got, like classical Athens, a thalassocracy, or an empire that's only contiguous by sea, called Srivijaya, and it's a Buddhist Hindu state. And then later you'll have Majapahit, it's hard to say, which is on the island of Java today, which is part of Indonesia. On mainland Southeast Asia, you also have some Hindu Buddhist states. The Khmer Empire, Angkor Wat is its capital that's still famous today. It's a ruined city today, it's not really the capital, but it has a Hindu temple complex showing you that Hinduism had made it here. And then you have the genesis of modern-day Thailand, Sukhothai, even though modern-day Thailand is down here too. Okay? So we read about these places. In Southeast Asia, in South Asia, it's where you have Islam, Hinduism, and Buddhism kind of converging. Hinduism is first, because it's the oldest contiguously worshipped or done faith from ancient times. Hinduism will move out by sea and land through land Southeast Asia and island-based Southeast Asia. Buddhism comes second, because Buddhism is originally a Hindu reform movement. Buddhism travels the Silk Roads. It also travels by sea, beginning in the Maurya Empire under the Emperor Ashoka, who actually sends missionaries out to spread Buddhism. So that makes Southeast Asia, island-based specifically, and even the land, kind of an amalgam of some Hindu belief and some Buddhist belief. And then later, Islam will spread in this era. So think in the 12 and 1300s, Islam is a new faith making its way through India and through Southeast Asia. Today, Indonesia is the largest population base anyways, Muslim state. But in 1200 to 1450, Islam is the newcomer. Okay? India is dominated by Hinduism. Only the north is Muslim. And the Sultanate is that's Muslim state in the north. World travelers travel through this region. Zheng He, the Chinese admiral, by sea, Marco Polo by sea and land, and then Ibn Battuta, the great Moroccan North African traveler. And this is the last era, as it says, that Southeast Asia and South Asia are independent. Because in 1498, the Portuguese make their own. Okay? Aztecs or the Americas. You need to know the Maya and the Inca. Maya, and today the Yucatan, Mesoamerica, and then the Inca, and today Peru. When you see the word Mexica, Mexica are what the Aztec called themselves. So Aztec and Mexica are the same thing. Their capital is Tenochtitlan, and that's modern day Mexico City. The question you guys missed the most about the Americas was this thing called the Chinampas, and I'll show you that in a second. So if you see Maya, Mesoamerica, Classical, Civ, Inca, South America, Aztec, or Mexica in the middle. You see these three guys, Cahokia, they're in what's today modern day Missouri. They're a sedentary agricultural Native American society. And then Mesa Verde and Chaco are the Pueblo peoples that live in the southwest in those cave things. I'll talk about these guys in a minute, but these are Polynesian migrations. Okay? So, brass tacks, what you need to know is this is pre-Spanish colonialism. Pre-Columbian is what it's called. It's prior to 1492. Three main societies, Mayans, Aztecs, Incas. Aztecs are also called Mexica. Floating gardens are these chinampas. So the images I have below. Mexico City today, or Tenochtitlan back then, was a city built on a lake. So they have to reclaim land from the lake. And by what that means, reclaim land, so it means they fill in portions with soil brought from outside the lake to create these agricultural basins. They irrigate through the lake, they travel through the lake, but they cultivate on the land made in between. So over centuries of doing this, eventually the entire lake is taken up. So today Mexico City, formerly Tenochtitlan, sits on what used to be a lake, a dry lake bed. So when earthquakes happen in Mexico City, they're pretty destructive because the land underneath the city isn't very compacted. It's dry riverbed or dry lake bed. Okay? So chinampas are an agricultural invention, a technique that the Mexican or Aztec invent to turn no land into land to support a large advanced civilization. If you need to know anything about these Polynesian peoples are those who live in what's called Oceania, in the Pacific Islands, from New Zealand to Easter Island to Hawaii. The only thing you need to really know is that in this era, these people exist and they create a common culture in a sense because they have advanced navigational practices. They're called wind talkers. They are able to read wind directions based on what's floating in the ocean. It's kind of complicated, but that's what it means. And Polynesian culture spreads from New Zealand all the way to Hawaii. And that's what that means. Unit 2 is called Networks of Exchange. Same time frame, but it's focusing not on individual societies, but on the connections between them. So there's a lot going on in this map. What it's trying to represent is trade goods that are flowing, beliefs that are flowing, inventions and ideas that are flowing over these major trade routes. So of course the Silk Road matters. The peoples that will come to dominate the Silk Road, the Mongols, and what they allow to transfer. In the Indian Ocean, these are the blue routes you see above, unites the different cultures of Eurasia and Africa through trade. Across the Sahara, there are what sometimes are called sand roads, or routes across that connect West Africa and Sudan to the Mediterranean world. And then this category are two kind of consequences of being connected. Consequences sound bad, but in some cases it's what spreads. Sometimes it's bad like a plague, other times it's important crops. Okay? So to focus on some of the major takeouts of these cultural consequences, because you guys miss questions about this. The major things that are transferring are these three main religions, and then Chinese technology. And then the people who are known for recording the spread, meaning they are kind of chroniclers moving from west to east. It's the Italian Marco Polo and the Moroccan Ibn Battuta, who use either the Silk Roads, in Battuta's case, the Indian Ocean routes, as their boats would. And as these belief systems spread, they change as they get further away from their heartland. So Islam in West Africa, in the Malian capital of Timbuktu, is going to look different than Islam in Saudi Arabia. Because the further the faith gets from its origins, the more it's going to mesh with the culture that it comes into. So there'll be West African cultural components to Arabian Islam. Just like Indian Buddhism looks different in Japan than it will in India. And if you think back to the year when we looked at Chinese Buddhism, even the image of the Buddha goes from being a skinny Indian guy to a rather obese Chinese dude. As they're trying to associate a foreign faith with an idea of plenty. So he's big, has a lot of food. And those blendings are called syncretism, cultural blending. Technological diffusion, think of it as technology. So from China, from east to west, you have paper, gunpowder, and then the concept of printing. Not the printing press, but printing per se. Okay? Culturally, the diffusion of Buddhism and the Neo-Confucianism from China to Japan and Korea. Because the Buddhism that goes to Korea and Japan is a Chinese version, not the original Indian. And then two crops that matter are how bananas go from the Indian Ocean to Africa. And then a specific form of rice called champa rice from Vietnam makes its way to China. And why champa rice is important is it can have multiple crops in a year. So you can harvest it twice, which means the same land can bring food 2 times in the season, which means it can support larger populations. And the rest of this image just shows other things that are transferred. In European history, the Crusades are an invasion of Southwest Asia by Europeans. It's also how Europeans come into contact with Asian goods and Asian innovations. Another topic you guys have problems with is looking at urbanization in this era, or cities. Cities have a kind of tumultuous rise and fall in the time period. Some decline because invasion. The most famous would be the city of Baghdad. It declines when the Mongols destroy it. So the Abbasid capital destroyed, will be rebuilt. It was destroyed in 1258 when the Mongols invade. The Black Death can make a city decline. A lot of the northern Italian cities decline when this plague hits. And we'll see in the Maya in Mesoamerica, some of their cities are going to be abandoned and they overfarm the land near it, and they no longer can support large temperatures. When the cities renew, these are all going to sound pretty obvious when you look at them. Longer temps mean longer growing seasons, more agriculture. Transportation and labor. I want you to think of those two as when trade revives long distance and cities are connected to each other by sea or land. That means more people can move to it, more people have a reason for being there, and then they'll grow in importance. And this chart shows you kind of what was up here, kind of visually, with examples of groups that are making cities decline and invasion. Diseases. If you ever see anything about the Little Ice Age, that's a time period from 1300 to about 1750 when European temperatures are lower, which means it's cooler, which means less of a growing season, which means less harvest, which means less people can be supported. The earth warms in the 1800s, warms, more growing season. It's not global warming like today per se. It's a warmer period that allows for human production of food to increase, which means more people. cities will grow when these things stop. Pretty much common sense. Two more things. To support these cities and these civilizations, there's different labor systems that are employed. This page is showing those that existed before 1200 that'll be continued. Free peasant labor, nomadic pastoralists, craftsmen, a word you might not be familiar with called a guild. And this is when multiple craftsmen in a city collect themselves together to protect their trade secrets and to keep their prices high. So if all the shoemakers in a town get together and decide that there's 10 of them and they don't want an 11th because an 11th would flood the market with too many shoemakers, they would keep their secrets of how do you make shoes. If anyone tried to become the 11th shoemaker, they would drive them out of town. And then in that way, they could have a monopoly and they could set prices. What guilds do over time is they also set standards. This is what a shoe should look like. This is how you build one. And they pass those trade secrets down to the next generation of craftsmen. Coerced labor, think of it as forced. The oldest form of forced labor is slavery. We'll talk later about two new ones that come out in this era. And let's get to those new ones. Serfdom. It exists in those feudal societies in Europe and Japan in this era. It's unpaid labor. Labor is an obligation. Because of your status of serf, you have to work for a lord. In Japan, the lord is called the daimyo. And in return for your labor, and the product of your labor, which is agricultural product, the lord protects you from outside threats. The system will last in Europe in many places until the 1800s. The last place with serfs is Russia, and they're ended in 1868. Japan is about that same time frame. So in the Americas, you had a system of coerced labor called the mita. And this is where the Incan state required each village to supply a certain number of laborers to do something for the public service. So it could be making roads, it could be making temples. And the mita was almost like a tax, but it was a tax on labor that each village supplied. These are very similar. In forced labor, where your labor is your payment. But you're physically not owned by the person in power. Your labor is owned. Okay, so that was a basic little quick review of global tapestry and networks of exchange. Any questions about anything on this, let me know. I'll post this, and I will tell you all. Adios.